I don't know what's happening. I'm trying to activate my camera and it's telling me Zoom is unable to detect the camera.
Oh, yeah. Are you, what kind of device are you on, Me?
On a laptop.
Oh.
My camera was working very well. Today it has decided.
Do you want to maybe you could email your intro to Lawrence and he could take over if it's not working for you. Because I noticed that your connection's a little choppy at the moment as well.
But in terms of the connection, at least I can get through. I don't know why the computer camera is refusing to.
Yeah. So yeah, so the webinar has started. Well, it's starting. We're going to leave a few minutes for attendees to sign in. So of course, the attendees right now, hello everyone. We're just going to wait a few minutes to allow people to come into the webinar space. So we're just, so you can hear our little like side conversation as we're still kind of prepping a few things. We're having a minor technical difficulty with the first moderator whose camera is not coming on. So we'll just work on that for a second. I see. If anyone in the attendance has any comments, they can share them in the, oh, thanks. I was gonna say, we are happy to get some comments in the chat box right away. Hi, Marco. Glad you're here too. Okay. So Lawrence, what I was gonna say is maybe you wanna send me just a quick email and see if he has any intro notes in case his connection drops, since he has a little bit of a challenge with his connection at the moment.
Okay. Okay, let me try to write up something.
Yep, this is great. So we'll give everyone just, it's 9:02, so I'll start just at around in a couple of minutes again while we let people join in. Hello, Roy. Thanks for joining. Stephanie, just there's a little note for you from Amber. Maybe you can send her a direct response. I'm not sure. You can send it by email to her as well. Hi, Mohammed. Good of you to join. Yeah, we're already at 40 attendees. Hi, Jeffrey, Jerome. This is great. Deanne, good to hear you. Good to see your words. Harshil, Mohammed. I'm just gonna yell out names for everyone who's taken the time to. Oh, bonjour, Andrew. Good morning, Dana. Deanne felt obligated to write something in French now, so just salut, just to let us know we've got French here. Oh, Harshil, you're boarding an airport plane. That's cool. Coming to Canada, great. Hi, Roland. Yeah. Oh, this is really great. Oh, Deanne says she actually knows who Andrew is. Perfect. That's great. Abraham's here. Nice. All right. Well, while people are trickling in, and to allow us to stay within our time frame, I will start with a slow introduction to get started for today. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to Climate Conversations with an African Focus. My name is Professor Onita Basu, and I am I work in the Department of Civil and Environmental Engineering at Carleton. I specialize in drinking water treatment and wastewater treatment, looking at sustainable methodologies in implementation practices. And I'm the current PI for the University Canada's Carleton program, which looks at climate change and societal transformation within an African context. And so it's a program that supports PhD students and early career researchers from Carleton University, Ghana, Malawi, and Tanzania to get some research acceleration with this focus on climate change and Africa in particular. So over the next 2 hours, we're going to hear a series of 4 talks ranging from an overview of the impacts of climate change on Africa in general, as well as then, starting to focus down on some specific impacts that we've seen in Ghana, Malawi, and Tanzania. And then we're going to finish the talk with a really interesting point of view on financing and accounting, which, for me is really helpful because often we look at like the technical side, but we really need to look at climate change from that interdisciplinary lens and pull in all facets of expertise if we feel like we want to make a change and to help help the planet, help ourselves. And the talk is timely. There was a recent UN assessment that came out of 100 countries indicating that we're not doing enough. In fact, even with the targets that have been set, we will not stop climate change. We will simply be slowing it down. And so we still need to really work on doing more. And on top of that, the other factor is, the UN has noted that Africa contributes the least to CO2 emissions. It's the least contributor to climate change, and yet it's being hit the hardest. It has the highest temperature changes, and as a result is suffering the most extreme weather events. So that's like flooding and then droughts that they're suffering from. So we're going to hear some more about that today. So I really want to welcome everyone that's here at the talk today. Just so you know, please feel free at any time to put questions in the chat box. We will hold the questions in the chat box until the end of each talk, and then the moderator will be able to sort of relay those questions back to the panelists that we have at the moment for each of the talk series, and we'll see how it goes. It should be fast-paced because we've got 4 separate talks that are happening. And on that note, I'm going to hand over the moderation to the first group and to Ni Adeji, who will be moderating the first session. Ni, the floor is yours, but you're just muted for a second.
Thank you very much, Onita. And thank you everyone for joining us. My name is Nia Jesoa, and I'm from University of Ghana. Currently, I'm a staff member, a faculty at University of Education, Winnipeg. Climate change indeed has had a lot of impact, especially in Africa, where drought and flooding is on the increase, and evidence is showing that indeed this is causing a lot of problems for people. So today, my group will be presenting a general overview of climate change impact on the continent. And to lead in the discussion is Mrs. Sandra Obriyeboa. She is a PhD candidate at the Center for Migration Study of the University of Ghana. She is currently working on a PhD, and the thesis area is on climate change impact and migration. And she's especially focusing on the northern Ghana. And then she's also a graduate assistant at the Center for Gender Studies and Advocacy at the University of Ghana. We also have part of the team, Lawrence Indegala, and he's a faculty at the Nelson Mandela African Institute. And then also have Elizabeth Makwe, who is also a faculty at the Nelson Mandela University. And then we have also Godfred from Mzuzu University. So we'll just go straight into our talk. I'll invite Sandra to make the presentation on the overview. Please, Sandra.
Thank you, Nii, for the kind gesture. I'm very grateful. And I'm presenting on behalf of my team. Before I start,
Oh, we might have a small technical glitch, which does happen when we are doing a webinar from many countries. Hopefully Sandra's connection will pick up. We've been practicing and she's had no problems until right now, which is clearly what happens when you're hosting a webinar. So we'll just give that a few minutes. And then, of course, sometimes when you're doing a talk, you don't know that you're having you're stalling out on the webinar. Oh, and now her connection has completely dropped. Stephanie, do you have Sandra's presentation?
Yes, I do have her presentation. Yeah.
Yeah. Maybe you want to put up the first slide?
Absolutely.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, there we go. Okay, there we go. So Sandra, we're glad you are back. You're just unmute yourself, and maybe to help with your connection, Stephanie can page through the slides for you to save some of your computer RAM to make sure everything connects.
Okay, thank you very much. And as introduced by my colleague, I'm Sandra Obriabua from the University of Ghana and presenting on behalf of my team. And our topic is on Africa Continent Overview, Climate Change Impact. And by way of outline, I'll begin with introduction through to adaptation and mitigation. Introduction. Climate change is a long-term shift in global or regional climates, and this is shown in record changes in terms of temperature and sea level. And obviously, climate change has become a major environmental and developmental concern for countries globally. And according to IPCC 2018, there has been a rise in the global average temperature of nearly 1 degree Celsius since pre-industrial era. And this is expected to rise to above 1.5 degrees Celsius. And also sea level is expected to increase between 0.26 meters to 0.98 meters. And this is clearly attributed to human activities, resulting in emission of excessive greenhouse gas concentration into the atmosphere, thereby causing temperature rise and also increase in terms of warming in the climate system. And from the graph here, we can see that there has been temperature increase from 1951 to 2011, which is within a space of 100 years. And clearly, you can see before the industrial era, temperature rise was slow, but after or between the industrial period, which is the 1960s right up to date, there has been an astronomical rise in temperature, which clearly states or which clearly indicates that, of course, our climate is changing. And when we talk about Africa, Africa is the world's second largest and second most populous continent after Asia in both cases. And here, in terms of climate change, Africa is also experiencing it in terms of rainfall and temperature. In the 20th century, we see a rise in temperature that is almost 0.0 likely. There is a likelihood that the continent will be experiencing greater warming in the late 21st century. And even though Africa only accounts for a small percentage of global greenhouse gas emissions, just below 7% in 2005, and has contributed less to historic emissions of greenhouse gases, the region is more likely to experience greater warming compared to the rest of the world. And why is it so? Because of low adaptive capacity, poor irrigation system, and over-reliance on natural environment for livelihood. Therefore, the region is vulnerable to the impact of climate change and its related impact on the environment. Here with this map, we can see major climate regions of Africa, and clearly the northern part of Africa and some part of southern Africa is dominated by desert conditions. And this is clearly manifested as a result of all this is evidence of climate change and its related effects, whilst in the middle portion of the continent is wetter with tropical rainforests and grasslands. Also, climate change affects Africa. And according to Vulnerability Index for 2015, Africa has a higher mortality rate of droughts from droughts than any other region. And also floods and droughts has doubled over the past 25 years with declining rainfall in some parts of the Sahel and Southern Africa. We have flooding, and flooding is the most prevalent disaster in North Africa, the second most common in East, South, and Central Africa, and the third most common in West Africa. And clearly, incidents of flooding cause extensive destruction of lives, livelihoods, and properties. And in West Africa and some parts of Sub-Saharan Africa, experience excessive and continuous rainfall resulting in droughts, and this affects over 1.5 million people, destroyed lives and livelihoods, caused the death of people, and as well as causes diseases. And within a month of August to September 2020, more than 1.21 million people in 12 different countries were affected by floods across Africa. And this is shown in the BBC News. And flooding in the year October 2020 hit 6 million people in East Africa. And also just recently in September 2021, this flash flood caused havoc in Abuja, destroyed properties, which we can see from the pictures. And also South Africa was hit by floods and also experienced some power cuts. Drought. More than 45 million people across 14 countries in 2019 were affected by drought. And between the period of 1900 and 2013, there were 642 incidents of drought cases reported globally. And out of it, it caused the death of over 2 million people and also affected more than 2 billion people. And not only that, just in the space of a year, that is from 2011 to 2012, there were incidents of flood in East Africa that caused the death of about 560,000 people. So clearly, human resource will reduce, and that will lead to some developmental problems or challenges in Africa. So clearly, incidents of extreme weather events is plaguing Africa, and there is really the cause to come together and then to stem the tide. Then we have a impact on water supply and quality. Here, not only is climate change affecting our water supply and quality in Africa, but also in other parts of the world, because clearly from the map, we can see that climate change impact on water quality is affecting most of the countries in Africa, where we have extremely high incidence of water shortages in some parts of Africa. And also in Saudi Arabia, we have other parts of the world that is also suffering from water supply and quality as a result of climate change impacts. And many African countries have extremely high water rates, as well as 1 in every 3 people across Africa face water scarcity. Impact on agriculture and food. Across Africa, the landscape is changing, which we obviously know, and it is really hit hard by drought, heat stress, and flooding. And all this have led to reduction in crop yields and also livelihood productivity. When I saw this picture, I thought this picture looks like people who are there in need of water, but obviously it is not a water shortage, but food. This clearly shows that climate change is really affecting the agriculture sector and food production. These people have queued with their buckets and gallons coming coming for food. This shows that yes, climate change impact on agriculture is real, especially it's affecting Africa the most. And also, East Africa, for example, is facing the worst food crisis in the 21st century. Next slide. Impact on deaths per year. And as we can see from the recent findings, that with an impact on national security. Here, studies have linked a 0.5 degrees warming with a 10% to 20% increase in the risks of deadly conflict. And here, in terms of climate change impact, especially on drought, where the natural resources like water become scarce, a lot of people, majority of the people struggle to for the supply of water, and this leads to conflicts. And changes in timing and intensity of rainfall have also threatened water availability and causing conflict, according to IPCC 2014. And again, almost 30 million will need aid in Sahel this year as crisis worsens, and all this is attributed to climate change. As we can see from the picture, this is obvious that climate change is really impacting on the lives of people in Africa. And this can also lead to conflict. And here, if we have the opportunity to watch this video, we can see that, yes, in the event of climate change and its related effects, it's really disastrous. And here, mitigation and adaptation measures. There are various mitigation and adaptation measures, but among them are Africa's Agenda 2063 and nationally determined contributions, that is NDCs, and the Paris Agreement. All these mitigation and adaptation measures, some African countries have submitted to, and in the NDCs as well. And we have 70% of the African NDCs prioritize clean energy and agriculture. Thank you for your attention. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Sandra. Thank you very, very much. So now we would like to invite questions, comments, clarifications, and other things. So far, I see a question from Dinah Honesel, and she wants to know the challenges faced by researchers in collecting data and comparing data from so many countries across the continent. So any member of the team can address the question.
Yeah, Sandra's connection just dropped. So Lawrence, looks like you're about to say something.
Yeah, just to with the silent moments, I think that the question goes direct to someone who's working on climate change research. So I think since me and Sandra are working on something connected to climate change, I think what Dana means is, what are the challenges that you guys are facing as researchers in collecting and comparing massive data in many different countries in your research? So she's maybe looking at the experiences that you guys have.
Okay. So in relation to the challenges with data collection, especially inter-countries and across-country data, is usually the availability of the data itself, especially when you want climate-specific data, temperature, rainfall. Most of the countries have very weak early warning systems, and then also they don't have the data, the actual ground data, to be able to compare and to see the changes over time. So most of the time we are having to rely on international sources for data. That tend to be, some of them are very accurate, but sometimes you are not getting precise data for the location you want to get. So some of them tend to be national in nature, and then it affects the kinds of estimations you are able to do, and then the kinds of extrapolation, especially for people who want to do simulations and need accurate data to be able to make, present good evidence for policy framing and all that. So that's one of the biggest challenge. And then also, sometimes moving from one location to the other, even within your own country, poor infrastructural development. As I speak now, I'm doing some work in Saboba, in the northeast region, and there's serious flooding. I mean, the road is unmotorable, so you can't even go into the community. For instance, you are studying the impact on livelihoods. You can't go into the community. So these are some of the challenges beyond getting the systems to actually collect the accurate data at specific locations. I think there are other questions.
Just to add on what Neil just said, I'm not directly working on climate change as a research topic, but in part of my study, I'm collecting some weather data and everything like that. And of course, my research study is in Tanzania. So of course, it's true that there is a big challenge in collecting these data sets. And so far, in my experience, the most reliable source that I have been able to collect a very complete data set is through these satellites that you find online. You can find the local sources are sometimes really discontinuous, very big gaps in the data sets. So most of the research right now, I think people are depending on online sources like people who are using the satellites, and most of those are not even in Africa, just other places like the US and everywhere, something like that.
Yeah, indeed, you are right. Okay, so we'll move on to the next question. And this is coming from Elisha in Gulube. And he wants to, before him, I think Professor Basu wants to know, do you feel that some regions are more affected by climate change than others? So Lawrence, would you want to address this one as we wait for?
Yeah, I feel so, because when you look at the different regions with different climatic conditions, there are obviously different regions are affected differently across Africa. For example, if you look at, you saw in one of those pictures, the Sahel region, which is has been a battlefield for a long time right now. And somehow climate change is not directly contributing to the situation there, but I think it makes the situation worse. So if you look at different parts, the Sahel, the Lake Chad Basin, for example, all of them are on the west part of Africa. And if you compare the other regions like East Africa, yes, we have some of these problems, but somehow in the West, if you add the desert situations out there, somehow the impacts are experienced differently in different parts of the continent, depending on where you are.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you very much. I think that is the issue. The geography of the place, of the location, affects the nature, and then even the climatology as well. Okay, so we'll move to the next question. Is there?
Sorry, Nee. I think we'll have to stop there because we're at our time for this section. There's a ton of questions though, so your team will be able to. We'll be moving your team into the attendee list. But what I'll encourage you to do is to answer those questions while you're in the attendee list, to try and get some of those answers out while we bring in the next team to continue with the presentation series. So Steph, we can start moving people in. I can move Amber. There we go. I'm going to get one in. So what we're doing right now, just for everyone who's attending the seminar, is we're moving the next group in, and then we'll be moving the current group into the attendee list, but they still have access to the chat function. So there's a lot of really wonderful questions in there, and I'm going to encourage the current team to try and answer them as we continue with the presentation series. So we've just moved in Amber, who will be the moderator for this session, followed by Yaw, and I will help with this if I can. All right. Okay. So Steph, I can't seem to move people back. Can you move people back?
No.
Oh, I can now. There we go. Okay, I'll work on moving people back and you can work on moving people in. There we go. All right. So we're bringing in Amber, Ya, Rosalia, Godfrey N, and Theodora. Looks like that's good. Ya's got his presentation up. So Amber, I'll just let you start taking over to do the introduction.
Wonderful, thank you. Hi everyone, thank you again for joining us today. My name is Amber Warnat, and I'm a PhD candidate at the Norman Paterson School of International Affairs at Carleton University. I'm privileged to be moderating the section on nature's contribution to urban resilience to climate change impacts in African cities. The academics presenting today include Ya Agyeman Boafu, who is a senior research fellow at the Center for Climate Change and Sustainability Studies at the University of Ghana. With a PhD in sustainability science, Ya draws on both conceptual and practical approaches to examine the implications of human-nature interactions. His research and teaching interests center around climate change and sustainability assessment with a specific focus on adaptation and mitigation, biodiversity and ecosystem services, disaster risk reduction and resilience, food and farming systems. Godfrey Nkogolo, climate justice enthusiast and PhD candidate at Carleton University, with a research focus on political participation in Tanzania. Theodora Tindwa is a lecturer at Mzuzu University Department of Governance, Peace and Security Studies. She holds a Master of Science in Development Studies from the University of Mauritius. Her current research focuses on effects of climate-induced stress on livelihood security in Malawi by realizing the multidimensional effects of climate change on economic, environmental, and also human security. Rosalie Mukolo has a Master's of Science in Mathematical Sciences, a Master of Science in Information Theory, Coding, and Cryptography. She's currently working as a lecturer in the Department of Mathematics and Statistics at Mzuzu University in Malawi since 2017. Today, they're going to take us through a very interesting presentation looking at rapid urbanization in Ghana, Malawi, and Tanzania. They will review some of the challenges, hazards, and risks, and their links to the Sustainable Development Goals. They ask some important questions on defining urban resilience and on how nature can enhance resilience to climate change in urban areas. They wrap up the presentation with an interesting deep dive into Accra and Dar es Salaam. Yeah, I'm going to pass it over to you now, as I believe you are going to start us off.
Yes, thank you very much, Amber. Thank you. We appreciate your introduction. So welcome once again, everyone, to this session. My name is Yao, as she pronounced, and my group will be talking about nature's contribution to urban resilience to climate change impact in African cities. This is a topic that we think is of very much importance in these times. So we'll basically look at what urbanization and urban growth really is within the context of Africa. Then we will highlight a few points around some of the urban sustainable development challenges. From there, we will look at what urban resilience really means and why it's critical now for African cities. And then we look at some of the core, what we call the climate change challenges in urban centers before we zoom down to the state of nature, or what we call green spaces within urban cities, with a focus on Accra in Ghana, Lilongwe in Malawi, as well as Dar es Salaam in Tanzania. We'll finish with some concluding remarks. So it's quite clear that, over the last 50 years, the global population has moved to become an urban population. That is, within a matter of 50 years, we've had more than 50% of the global population live in urban areas. And this particular trend is even more critical in Africa, in African cities that are currently known to be experiencing the highest or the fastest form of urban growth in the world. So currently, we have about 567 million people out of about 1.2 billion people in Africa living in urban centers. And this is expected to grow actually very, very rapidly in the coming years. And part of it is partly because of the fact that, African countries are still experiencing a very high birth rate. That means that more and more people obviously are being born on a daily basis. And that also brings about movement or migration from rural to urban areas for various reasons, because urban areas to many are places of empowerment, and that is something that I think needs to be taken note of. One of the things that is also quite clear is that the urban growth in Africa is highly disparate, in a sense that there's high variations even across the African continent. So if you look at Northern Africa, some of the major cities there are highly urbanized, like Cairo. You can look at Algiers and Tunis. But if you come down to the central part of Africa, the urbanization level is not as high. So you don't have a huge percentage of them being urbanized. Then if you move down to the south as well, we have, cities in Cape Town as well as part of Namibia, which are all, also highly urbanized. So this variation is quite clear, as you said. Nevertheless, it's important to note that it is a case of high urbanization rate across Africa. So if you look at this particular map here, for instance, which is actually giving us a sense of global cities with the highest annual growth rate, you realize that more than 50% of them are in Africa. So clearly you can see the center here that majority of the cities within Africa have more than 5% growth rate on a daily basis. And one of the things that we've seen about the kind of growth rate that is occurring in African cities is that we see that a lot of the cities that are highly urbanizing have low levels of wealth. And also they have what we call fiscal resources, as well as service delivery rates are very poor. So that creates many challenges. There's also a low level of industrialization and motorization and also technology. So if you compare many African cities to cities in some Asia, like Shanghai, like in Tokyo, there's no differences, and that makes it quite interesting when it comes to urbanization trends. What we've also seen is that currently there's also weak systems and institutions to govern the urbanization that we are seeing in Africa. And that is also another issue of interest that I think we'll highlight as we go on. So we also wanted to give you a sense of the current state of urbanization in Ghana, Malawi, and Tanzania, and how that also brings about different challenges. So out of these three countries, Ghana currently has the highest level of urbanization, with more than 57% of its population living in urban centers. And that, basically it's compared to Tanzania, which is 35.2%. Malawi basically is still quite low, but it's also growing at a rapid rate. And for your information, Tanzania, for instance, in the year 2019, more specifically, Dar es Salaam was rated to be one of the fastest growing cities in the world. And that tells you about the rapidity of it. These countries, or these cities in these countries, are also experiencing common challenges. And we can talk about poverty levels being high. We can talk about pollution. We can talk about waste management challenges. We also talk about overcrowding. And these are issues that are cutting across these countries that are bringing different kinds of challenges to people and nature. So then the question is, what are some of the other urban sustainable development challenges that are associated with the ongoing? And one of the things that we've noted from our research basically is that urbanization and rapid population growth are obviously working together to create challenges. Obviously, there are opportunities as well, but the challenges sometimes are problematic. And so what are some of the challenges? We want to frame our challenges in the context of the SDGs. So if you look at all the 17 SDGs, which we, already we are more than 10 years into it, clearly these SDGs are also problems. So if we talk about poverty, no poverty, that is our goal, but it's also a problem that we are dealing with. If we talk about clean water and sanitation, we highlighted sanitation as a major challenge in many urban, African cities. So these are key challenges, and more importantly, also climate change, which is the core for this discussion. So we want to see that these challenges are challenges that needs to be dealt with through a collective action, and that's why we are interested in this particular research. So climate change, again, and rapid urbanization are two key challenges that have been discussed in the SDGs. And if you look at them critically, they work together to also breed other kinds of challenges. And so in a recent work by Kobna, where they look at extreme cities that are extremely vulnerable to climate change, 100 of these cities are actually found in Africa. This gives you a chance to see what I'm talking about. So clearly, the vulnerability levels in African cities are so huge and so high, and that this calls for concern when it comes to the streams. If you compare it to other parts of the world, it's a real cause for concern. And so, visually, this gives you a chance to also see the different kinds of climate-related hazards that are impacting on African cities. And so we can think about coastal erosion, and with coastal erosion right here in Accra, Ghana, coastal erosion is a major concern. We can talk about Senegal, Dakar. We can also talk about many other coastal cities, even in Lagos. But if you move away from the coastline, the cities where they are even located in landlocked countries, they have issues with heat wave and flooding. That is something that's occurring on a yearly basis. And the heat wave is not something that we talk about most because of the already tropic nature of African cities, but it's something that is already a big health issue based on recent research. And so here we show you some, photos of recent incidents of flood in major African cities. You can see on the very first one on the left side, Dar es Salaam flooding in 2015. And then we can also look at the situation in Lilongwe in Malawi in 2020. These are things that most of us, I'm sure, have encountered in our cities or have heard about or read about. These incidents of flooding, of heat wave are expected to actually go high with time. And so we're saying that there's a need for urban resilience. It's very important to look at resilience to see how cities can bounce back in times of these different kinds of hazards. So then what is urban resilience? What exactly do we know when we say urban resilience? In a resilient urban setup, we have a situation whereby the governance networks, as well as the metabolic flow, that is the production and consumption of goods and services, are in sync. We also have a situation whereby the social dynamics, what it means is that urban resilient cities take care of the social dynamics, the demographics are counted, the social capital and equity. Then more importantly, also the built environment. How is the built environment impacting on ecosystems? Because, in that secular manner, we need to be able to look at these interactions to be able to have a good flow of systems in that regard. So that is urban resilience. That's anytime the city is able to bounce back. So then it's becoming important to look at urban resilience again, because apart from what I just highlighted, cities have become the central, nexus of relationship between man and nature. Because again, the future is the city. So how do we ensure that our cities are really in sync with nature? Then also vulnerable populations are increasing in urban areas. That is something that again, one cannot overlook. So I believe we need to look at this. Again, there's a rise in slum and informal settlement all over Africa. So how do we also deal with this? We can also look at issue what we call unprecedented degradation of natural ecosystem. You just need to take a look at any part of any city in Africa and see the kind of infrastructure development and how total destruction of nature is taking place. And also the impact of climate change, which we cannot predict. So these are core issues that say that we need to be more resilient. So the question again is, why is nature really important? Why should we even worry about incorporating nature in our cities? And one thing that is quite clear is that, there's abundant evidence to tell us that in a place that has a good mix of nature, there's likely to be a lot of value. So it brings out what we call ecosystem services, which we all know are the benefits we get from nature. So a city that has a good amount of nature, it could be plants and water, is able to also what we call reduce smog. You can take a case of China, maybe Beijing, which is known for oil smog. If it has more nature, that's something that will help. It can also obviously help sequester carbon dioxide. And we know that it can also help to reduce noise. In a place with forests and all that, the noise levels will be reduced. And for instance, in Accra, where there's so much noise from music, from cars, these are benefits that it will bring to us. And more importantly, also, considering all the flooding that is happening, we know that where there are wetlands, these can be helped to reduce the impact of wetlands. So nature is very critical in our cities. And so we decided to then look at the state of nature in some cities in Africa. And in our broad review, one of the things that we found out was that the current situation with green spaces or nature in Africa is such that the nature spaces that are found are all legacies or what we call colonial administration or post-colonial legacies. The time of colonial rule, where there were areas that were set aside as rich or botanical gardens, and these were preserved. These things are still there, but not much has been done over time to increase those green spaces. Another issue that we found out is the high spatial disparity in the distribution of nature. So you could have maybe some parts of the city center with amount of nature, but as you move away, there's no form of nature at all. So in the Accra metropolis, for instance, this is a work that we just published that shows you the changing situation when it comes to green spaces in the city. So by green spaces, for instance, we could be looking at grassland and also dense vegetation. So through this land use assessment that we did, we found out that, over the period of, let's say, 27 to 30 years, nature reduced from 44% to 15%. That is astronomical. That is really, really shocking. But that is the situation. So a lot of activities, including buildings, commercial buildings, densification in the city, road construction, and many other things are causing the loss of nature. And that is the loss. The loss is continuing, as you can see right from here, from grassland and then from vegetation. If you accumulate it, you have 44, 26, and then 15%. That's a very worrying situation for our city, especially Accra. But yet still, there are still some green spaces in some part of the city that people enjoy. People have a lot of value for, let's say, University of Ghana campus. There's still some parts of the city that are still useful, Achimota Forest, as you can see from this map here. And I wanted to also show you a very sharp contrast. So this is a photo taken in 2019 of Accra Central Business District. Those of you familiar, this place. We have the National Theatre here, very green, almost all year round. But then just about 3 kilometers away from this part of the city, you have this. This is the Sodom and Gomorrah. This is the slum. And this area, we used to be a wetland. It has totally been destroyed for this purpose. And that obviously has impact. At this juncture, I will invite my colleague Rosalia to share some insights on the situation in Lilongwe, Malawi.
Malawi is also one of the countries in Africa which has been hit with rapid urbanization. And in this case, people their so that spaces, the green spaces. So in that case, like in Lilongwe, most of the headquarters are in Lilongwe, and most people try to move to the capital city in Lilongwe so that they can work there and also do their businesses. So they end up getting the infrastructure in order to develop. They end up getting the forest cover in order to develop their infrastructures. And some of the problems that we face in Malawi are lack of understanding in the law of urban green spaces and the wildlife claims. These are some of the major challenges. But what is being done in Malawi is that Malawi government established some botanical garden as well as the nature sanctuaries in the major cities in Malawi. And some of these botanical gardens, they are found in Muzuzu City, Lilongwe, as well as Zomba. Apart from the botanical gardens, there is a green project in Malawi which is building the ecological and economic and social value of the Lilongwe Wildlife Center, which you can see on the bottom left corner. That's the picture of Lilongwe Wildlife Center. Apart from that, we also have the urban arc projects, and this helps the areas that are prone to disasters in order to make them more resilient, so that this is not only in the cities but also in some other areas. So at this point, I'll hand over to Godfrey Nkongolo to give us some overview on Dar es Salaam in Tanzania. Thank you.
Hi, Rosaria. Thank you so much. Just building on what has been said, I would like to give an overview of the situation in Dar es Salaam, Tanzania. Try to highlight some of the challenges and initiatives being done. So Dar es Salaam, similar to Accra, but also Lilongwe, has not been spared from flooding. And this is due to the increase in economic activities, which lead to loss of green cover. And the situation is being made worse by the rapid increase in population. Dar es Salaam now is at 7 million people, but it's growing very fast at the rate of 5.6%, and is expected to reach a population of 10 million people in 2030. So all these challenges contribute to the flooding and other climatic issues. What is being done in Dar es Salaam at the moment? So there are a number of initiatives in place. Some of them are sponsored by the international community, in particular the UK government, but also the World Bank has launched a big project there in Tanzania trying to address this issue, particularly establishing botanical gardens and other ways in which they can minimize the impact of flooding but also make Dar es Salaam green, but also trying to address the issue of population. The city, the government has been moving most of its operations and offices from Dar es Salaam to another city, Dodoma, just try to reduce the number of population growth in Tanzania. And just to address other issues related to climate, the government has, banned the use of plastic bags, among other things. All of these are geared not just to address the issue of flooding, but the issue of environment in general. Thanks. Back to you, Yao.
Yes, so by way of concluding remarks, one of the things that we think is important is that if you look at the informality of African cities, it's important to find ways to incorporate, formal into informalities. What it means is that we don't just throw away informality. Informality is still part of our cultural and social context. So in planning for a more resilient city, we need to look carefully at informality issues. We also think that there's a need to focus on climate change adaptation and spatial planning within the cities. All cities need to look at that, right, from not just the capital cities. Then also we think that the mobility systems, transportation need to start looking at low carbon and encouraging people to be more interested in moving around in the way that is more important. So just so that you appreciate this, there's still a lot to be happy about. In many important cities in Africa, there's some projects that are already taken off that are looking at how to ensure that the cities are green for now and also for the future. And these are just some examples. We can talk about Kigali, we can also look at Cape Coast in Ghana, as well as Tanzania, and even in Lilongwe, as was talked about. So we'll end here and say thank you very much, everyone, for being here today. We are open to questions and any sort of feedback. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone. That was an excellent and very interesting presentation. I'm going to open the floor now to questions. So please pop them in the chat, and I will head through them. Looks like the additional diameter. I think we start here. So Anita has a question. It's a question for you. How does informal settlement growth impact urban planning and resilience?
Great. So thank you very much. Thank you very much, Olita. So this is a very key question because that's one of the biggest challenges we face in our cities. And in Accra, for instance, there's a rapid growth in informal settlements. We actually term them kiosk nations. And these informal settlements are sometimes made of kiosks, wooden kiosks that people just, prepare and put them in different parts of the city. And people tend to put these kiosks in areas that are what we call even, that are reserved areas, like along water bodies, in wetland areas. And these are areas that, when it comes to something like rainfall, flooding, it's always you need these spaces to be able to move. So because people are increasingly inhabiting these areas, it's also impacting on the resilience of our cities. And also these areas have become areas of crime because people tend to hide there and do all kinds of things. These areas are also areas that are, hotspots for different kinds of health issues. And so these are critical, some of the issues that impact on the resilience of our cities due to informal settlements. Thank you.
Thank you, Ya. We have another question here from Michelle. COVID measures in many cases considered a formality, almost as a synonym to illegality. Do you see a negative or positive trends in recognizing informality in Africa?
So, thank you. That's a very insightful point that you just made. Well, yes, I think that the current pace of urban growth in Africa is such that we have a chance to learn from maybe how a city like London grew maybe back in the 1800s. And then we can pick some lessons from these areas and not necessarily, in my opinion, look at the current situation of urban growth in London and say that because London is doing it this way, we should do it this way. So I think that if you look at it and pick some lessons and also look at how the level of education or the level of the social capital, cultural capital that we have in our cities, we can find a way to, integrate it in our way of life, and that can still bring us a lot of benefits. So personally, I feel like there could be many benefits to enjoy from informality in Africa if we look at it from our own, point of view, and also taking into consideration the social and also demographic dynamics that we have in our country. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah. We have a question here from Diane. We maybe have time for one or two more. So Diane asks, can you expand on the importance to integrate informality into urban planning?
Okay, so I guess informality has gained a lot of interest in this point. So one of the things that we are focusing on is that if you look at the level of education of a huge chunk of people moving or migrating into the urban centers, a lot of people are still lowly educated. They move from rural areas, they come in, they want to make a living. Sometimes they have skills. These people have various kinds of skills. So for instance, there is a huge number of people who have skills to be able to do farming. And so one of the things that I proposed was that if we could have a form of urban agriculture that has a space for people of this nature to be able to farm with the skills that they bring from rural areas, that is one way that could let people appreciate their lives. And also, within this system of, let's say, farming, there's a way for a place for them to reside. Because, if you look at the production of food crops from rural areas to urban areas, there are many challenges with even transportation and also the use of different kinds of chemicals. So that is just one example of how you can integrate, informal sectors into the economy or into the social fabric, so that when people don't come in and into the urban areas and become a burden on the urban areas because there's no job or there's no accommodation. So I think that requires a lot of what I call the collaborative work from different stakeholders in doing that. But that is something that I'm willing to talk about more, after this presentation.
Thank you again. We'll do this one last one here, and then if anyone has further questions, if you could put them in the chat, and then the group will be able to answer them there. So we have one from Mohammed. Is government, or are African governments in the cities that you were looking at, are they doing anything to control population shift from rural to urban areas?
So if my colleagues, one of them could quickly pop in with the response.
Rosalia Godfrey, are you able
Yes.
to?
Can you hear me now? Okay.
Yes.
As far as I know, in Tanzania, the government does not restrict people from moving from rural to urban areas. But what happens, because most of the people who are going to the city, especially in Dar es Salaam, because they're looking for work and things like that. So this is what is driving the movement from rural to urban areas. So the government is discouraging that movement by trying to stimulate economic activities in rural areas, in other parts of the country. So it's not so much about the law in place saying like you can't move to urban areas, but they're trying to stimulate economic activities in other places. As an example that I've given in when I gave the I highlighted some of the challenges and initiatives in Dar es Salaam, is the fact that the government in Tanzania has moved these operations from the city to the capital city of Dodoma. This is to discourage people from going to Dar es Salaam. So it contributes a little bit, but it doesn't solve the problem. But the main way in which the government restricts that movement is by establishing and encouraging economic activities in rural areas.
Just in addition to what Godfrey has said, like in Malawi, government is trying to develop even the rural areas to bring some developments in the rural areas, so that maybe some people who like to move from the rural area to the city, because there's no development in the rural areas, they can stay in the rural areas if the development is there. So that's about Malawi.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Godfrey and Rosalia. Anita, I'll pass it back over to you.
Great.
And on to the next group. Thanks you again, everybody. That was a very interesting presentation.
Great. Yeah, thanks everyone. And there's a whole bunch of questions and comments in the chat box for your team to address still. So I'm going to encourage you to work on that as well while we do that. So at the moment, what we'll do is Stephanie is going to move up the next group for the talk, and I will move most of the current participants back down to the attendee list while we get that set up. Okay. And let's see here. All right. Okay. And so I think that's good. I think we moved just about everyone other than that. So Ya, you are moderating this session, I believe. Is that correct? Oh.
Yes, I am.
He needs a moment. I know, you just finished, you needed a moment.
Yeah,
So I'm going to hand it over to Ya to do the introduction for our next talk. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. We appreciate your time. And my name is Yao Ajimai-Bwafo, as was told you by Ambaelia. I'm currently a senior research fellow at the Center for Climate Change at the University of Ghana. I'll be moderating this session. And this session is entitled Agriculture and Food Security in the Face of Climate Change, a comparative case of Ghana and Malawi. So, this talk will basically explore how climate change impacts on all aspects of the food system, with a special reference to Ghana and Malawi, of course. The few scholars, doing this today include Roland. We have Roland, we have Michael, we have Joseph, and Ulemu. So I'll do a brief, profile of each of them. And with us as a presenter is Roland. Roland is from Ghana. He's a doctoral researcher at the Institute for Environment and Sanitation Studies at the University of Ghana. Roland is also a natural capital project scholar, and as well as a fellow of the Carnegie Corporation of New York. His current PhD research basically focuses on how communities are building resilience in the context of ecosystem use and then in the face of climate change. That's what he's working on. And then we have with us Dr. Michael Sepula. So Michael holds a PhD degree in hospitality management and from Moore University in Kenya. He's currently a senior lecturer in hospital management in the Department of Hospitality Management under the Faculty of Tourism, Hospitality and Management at Mzuzu University in Malawi. And he's currently focusing on the mitigation of environmental impact of hospitality operations and tourist recreational activities on the Lake Malawi. Those of you who don't know how Lake Malawi looks like, you should take your time and check it out. Very interesting lake across the country. Then our third scholar is Joseph. Joseph Mensah is also from Ghana. Joseph is currently a PhD student as well at the Department of Animal Biology and Conservation Science at the University of Ghana. And his doctoral research titled The Impact of Cocoa Farming Systems on Selected Biodiversity Hazard in Ghana. This study centers around sustainable agriculture and certification. And he also is interested in areas of biodiversity conservation, agroforestry, and climate change. Then we have, last but not the least, scholar, Dr. Ulemu Nsiska. So Dr. Ulemu is a plant breeding and biotechnology expert from Makerere University, and she's currently a lecturer at the Mzuzu University in the Department of Agri Sciences. And then Ulemu has vast experience in food security, plant protection. She has a special interest in reducing the use of organic chemical pesticides for agriculture production through breeding for resistance to pests and diseases. And clearly, she's also interested in what she calls, she wants to make agriculture more sexy for the youth so that they can be more involved in that. That's something. So at this point, I wouldn't waste a lot of time again. I will invite Roland to give us a presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Doc, for your kind introduction. I'm presenting on behalf of my colleagues from Mzuzu University and University of Ghana. And our talk is on climate change, food security and agriculture, a comparative case for Ghana and Malawi. This is the outline. Our presentation will look at a big background, looking at the country profile for each country and the current food security and production systems in both countries. and how climate change risks and impact will affect those sectors. And then also we'll try to look at how the agri sector also contributes to greenhouse gas emissions, and for that matter, climate change. And at the country level, what are some of the policy responses and interventions that are being pursued in addressing climate change and building the resilience of the agriculture sector? And then we'll look at some opportunities. Climate change is not all that gloomy. There are good opportunities that both countries can also take advantage of and be able to build their resilience. And we'll conclude with some key take-home messages. So clearly, it is evident that about 97% of researchers globally have endorsed that human influence contributes to climate change. And the sector that will be adversely affected is the agriculture sector. And that will have serious implications for countries, particularly developing countries, for which Ghana and Malawi is not an exception. And our objective in this presentation basically is to understand the implication of anthropogenic climate change on the agriculture sector, focusing on Malawi and Ghana. And we are doing this using desktop reviews and some secondary data that we have retrieved. So as a brief background for both countries, Ghana is a Sub-Saharan African country and is located along the Gulf of Guinea and the Atlantic Ocean and a sub-region of West Africa. The country is an economic, agriculture-based economy, and is rated as the second largest cocoa producing country in the world to Cote d'Ivoire. And Malawi, on the other hand, is a southern African country defined by its topography of highlands, splitted by the Great Rift Valley, and of course, the enormous Lake Malawi, which many of you will be interested to go and have a look. And in terms of agricultural contribution to both countries, we've observed that, yes, both countries have increased in their population growth. Ghana is currently at 31, and Malawi is doing at 18 million people. And in terms of the agricultural sector contribution to GDP growth, Ghana is doing at 21%, and Malawi is currently at 30%. And when you look at how both countries, in terms of engagement, employment of the agriculture sector, Ghana is at 44.7%, and Malawi is currently 80%, meaning predominantly a higher percentage of the people in Malawi are in the agri sector. And both countries also have different cash crops and staple food crops, both for export and also for subsistence. And in Ghana, predominantly, cocoa is one of the key cash crops that the country currently produces. And Malawi, they also are into tobacco. Tobacco is a predominant cash crop in Malawi. And both countries also have a number of staple food crops that are produced for local consumption as well as for export. Now, when you look at the level of engagement in terms of gender segregation, you see clearly that there is a disparity in gender distribution for both countries within the agricultural sector. Whereas in Ghana, you have more men involved in the agri sector than women. In Malawi, it is the opposite. You see a lot of women dominating the agricultural sector than men. And in the event of climate change, it means that these groups of people will also be affected disproportionately. And women are seen to suffer more in terms of lack of access to resources and the predominance of men to land ownership and other things. So women definitely will be the losers when climate change hits very hard in the agri sector. Now we try to look at the current food security situation. And in our first data here suggests that yes, both countries are doing well in terms of the production levels. We have increasing trend of total production for both countries. And both countries are doing this to meet the population demand. Once I said earlier in the presentation, we have an increasing trend of population growth. And so both countries, food has to also be able to produce enough in order to feed this teeming population. But in the event of climate change, what this means is that production will be affected, and for that matter, the population growth also will have an impact, and that calls for a lot of concern. We tried to look at the various staple food crops for both countries, and we selected few of them, and you see clearly, yes, both countries in terms of production levels are also on the increase, and this is consistent with the earlier slide. However, when you look at Malawi in the figure B, you realize that maize is on the decline, particularly in the last 3-4 years. And this is attributed to the fact that maize is sensitive to drought and flooding extreme events. And also the challenges, especially in Malawi, in input supplies, example fertilizers, has become a very big challenge. And so the production level for that food crop tend to go down. Now, both countries, in terms of the fight against the prevalence of undernourishment, you will see in this graph that the results have been positive, the effort has been positive. But the challenge is in the event of climate change, will these figures continue in this trajectory? So the impact of climate change definitely will have a negative impact on this effort, whilst production levels in the future will be impacted by climate change. As you will see in the next slide, the implication on food security will also have impact on the prevalence of undernourishment for both countries. Now we try to decipher further into the level of food insecurity in terms of severe and moderate among the population for both countries. And you see clearly in this graph that Ghana current severe food insecurity situation is around 9%, with moderate food insecurity around 48-49% of the population. Whereas in Malawi, we have over 49 to 50% of people living in severe food insecurity situation, and over 79 to 80%, almost 80% are food insecure. And in the event of climate change, you see clearly that this trend will increase. And the quest for achieving the Sustainable Development Goal, particularly goal number 2, which aims at ensuring that we have zero hunger by 2030, this will be affected negatively. So the need to step up effort of harnessing other means of increasing the resilience of the agri sector is a timely call. And when you look at the impact of climate change, more specifically with regards to temperature for both countries, clearly in this graph, you will see that there has been an increasing trend, especially in the last decades. Temperature for both countries have increased, and that will mean that there will be a lot of impact on water availability. There will be a lot of impact on other extreme events that can impact the agri sector negatively. And in terms of rainfall, it's also not different. We have seen that both countries have different rainfall patterns, and it is highly unpredictable and uncertain. Whereas in Malawi, especially in the southern part, they have low rainfall patterns than the northern sector. In Ghana, it is the opposite. We have in the northern part suffering severe or low rainfall patterns than the southern sector. And in the event of increasing or unpredictable climate change, you realize that these trends is going to also be negatively impacted. And this comes with a lot of increasing hazards. For instance, we have extreme droughts, which occurs in most parts of both countries. And this figure, as you can see, this farm is completely in drought, meaning that all the crops can't survive this situation. And that leads to a lot of food crops loss. impacting livelihood of local farmers and making many people to go into food insecurity. And we also have flooding. Even where the situation happens and there is rain, it comes in torrential form. It comes in large quantities that also flood most of the cropping areas. And as you can see in this graph, that definitely this maize wouldn't be able to survive. And that will mean a lot of impact and a lot of food insecurity situations and poverty levels that can affect the local farmers. I will show a video here where it talks about not just about food crops, but also livestock. And you will realize that the impact of climate change does not only affect food crops, but also it does impact on livestock.
I'm afraid the video is not showing yet. So Roland.
Sorry?
Your video is not showing. I don't think it's showing. Maybe I'm the only one.
Okay. Okay, let me restart. I'm trying to share a video screen that shows the event of flooding. Is it visible?
It's visible now.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, so from the video, you've seen clearly that the impact of climate change is not only on food crops, but this is showing clearly the devastating effect of this flood on livestock. And as you see the cattle livestock being washed down due to extreme flooding in northern Ghana, a neighboring part of Burkina Faso, following a torrential flood in 2020 last year. And you realize that this devastating impact of flooding on the livestock is a huge loss to the local farmers. It took them decades of investment to come up with this. And guess in a day, this is gone down the drain. So you could imagine the psychological trauma and the impact it will have on these farmers. So clearly the impact of climate change is something that requires attention, especially for the agri sector. And not only that, you realize we have water scarcity also affecting negatively on other livestock because of unavailability of water resources for these livestock. And that exacerbates disease prevalence and other disease incidences, making these livestock more vulnerable to the impact of climate change. Now, let's draw our attention to the other side where you see that it's not just the agri sector being impacted by climate change, but we're also looking at how the agri sector is influencing climate change. And you will see clearly in this graph that both countries, in terms of the agri sector contribution to greenhouse gas emissions, has predominantly increased and exceed the other areas in terms of energy, waste, and industry use. The agri sector linked to forestry and other land uses predominates in this level of contribution. And for Ghana, we are contributing over 54.6% in terms of the country total emissions. and in Malawi it's also 52.5%, meaning that predominantly this is a sector that is not just vulnerable, but it's also a sector that is contributing to both country emissions. And for that matter, the need to come up with innovative ways by which we can also make the sector a sector of climate change mitigation potential. So in response, both countries clearly have initiatives and policy in terms of responding to climate change. Ghana, for instance, we have the National Climate Change Policy and the nationally determined contributions. These are all aimed at not just adaptation, but also increasing the country resilience and mitigation potential. And we also have other interventions to boost production of food commodities, especially in the face of climate change. For Ghana, we have the Planting for Food and Jobs, Investing for Food and Jobs, the One Village, One Dam initiative launched in 2017. These are all government flagship programs aimed at boosting the agriculture sector, as well as creating more jobs for the teeming unemployed youth. And in Malawi, it's also the same, where we have the National Climate Change Investment Plan, the National Climate Change Management Policy, the National Agricultural Policy, and the National Land Restoration Management Policy. These have strategies in place aimed at building resilience of the agri sector, as well as addressing climate change. But the issue is not just having the policies at hand. We are thinking of implementation as the key thing. It's one thing to have the policies, but it's another thing to implement. So before we conclude, we look at some opportunities that are presented and both countries can make use of. Number one, we see that yes, there will be increasing drought, but also this calls for making use of the vast irrigation potentials of both countries, that we can go into also agroforestry practices that can build the resilience of the sector and also boost production, especially for the growing demand for food and all that can also help in investment and also export commodities. So to conclude, we'll briefly state some of the key takeaways. As you see in the presentation, indeed, climate change is a major threat to the sector of agri for both countries. And yet the agri sector is also the leading driver when it comes to greenhouse gas emissions. And there is huge irrigation potential that exists for both countries to boost production, as well as enhance their resilience to the impact of climate change. This undoubtedly calls for the adoption of climate smart practices that is more imperative than an option. On this note, we'd like to thank our sponsors, especially Carleton University and the QES sponsorship, and our supporting university here in the University of Ghana and the University of Nzuzu. We are so grateful for the opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Roland. Thank you and your team for a very great presentation. Clearly, this presentation informs us about the climate change effects on agriculture and also agriculture effects on climate change. And so this is very, very informative. Thank you very much. So please, we are opening the floor for questions. You can raise your hand using the raise hand button. You can also type out your questions on the platform, as some of you have done already. So for now, I'll highlight some of the questions that we have, but please keep writing them. You can also give us your questions by voice. So the first question to your team is, somebody wants to know, I think this is Roy. Actually, Roy wants to know, can women's vulnerability to climate change be addressed by strengthening their formal and informal rights and access to land? Can women's vulnerability to climate change be addressed by strengthening their formal or informal rights and access to land? So any of you can go ahead and answer that, please.
Ilemo, may you want to talk?
Yep. Yeah, definitely, yes. Increasing rights to women owning land will definitely improve on the climate change impacts. Because one, the moment women own land, it is an incentive to them, because remember the norms and the social norms in most of the society, they favor men. So when women own land, there will be it's like an incentive. And as such, when it comes to land degradation, soil conservation measures, it's women who will be taking part in these things. And once women have authority over land, it means they have control and access over land. They have that feeling that they will also improve their crop yields. They will improve on the work on when it comes to soil conservation measures, but also they'll be able to plant more trees, knowing that that land belongs to them and they'll protect it. And they'll protect it for their children. So really, indeed, I'll say, once we look at the rights of women in land ownership, it's a great thing that need to be taken by most of African countries. Yeah.
Excellent, thank you. And we have another question here from Jeffrey. So Jeffrey is asking, will identifying crops that is resilient to changes, that is, for example, temperature, will they help deal with the climate changes?
Yes, that's another thing. Like, for example, in Malawi, what we're doing currently is, apart from depending on the crops like maize, we are introducing crops that are drought tolerant, such as sorghum, finger millet, the cowpeas, and most of the legume crops that we have. These crops are doing very well when it comes to being resilient to climate change effects. So it's very important that out there we have a number of projects which are looking at biodiversity and conservation of these crops, so that farmers can produce more of these crops, unlike some other crops like maize, which is very sensitive to changes in the climate and its effects. So yeah, that's important. So we are making sure that these crops I've mentioned should be adopted by most of the farmers in these countries, and that means we'll make good progress in mitigating climate change effects.
Great. So presenters, I'll encourage you to try and answer some of the questions, so that even though I'm giving some out, you can still answer them as and how you want it. So there's also another question here from Diane. So Diane says that policy implementation, what are the key issues related to quick and effective implementation of policies? Diane Isabel is asking your team.
I would say something, then my other colleagues will also add their input. When it comes to policy, we observe it's very easy to come up with the policies, especially in Ghana, for instance. But beyond that, the issues of funding is very critical to policy implementation. And if you don't have enough funding, definitely coming up with a policy, you may not be able to implement. And also the level of involvement that you have encouraged, especially with the various stakeholders, will also enhance their support in the implementation of such policy. So I would say two things. It's about funding and also getting a lot of support from diverse groups so that those policies can be effectively implemented. My other colleagues, Joseph and Michael, if you want to also come in, yes.
Thank you, Laurent. Just to add on to what Laurent has said, in the case of Malawi government has made actually remarkable progress in incorporating climate change in development plans, policies, and strategies. However, the major problem that we have noted is that there is an implementation gap in the main barriers to achieving anticipated outcomes. For example, insufficient human capacity in relevant institutions and probably weak private-public partnerships, as well as some other things contribute to this gap. And therefore, Malawi government to address these challenges, supranational organizations such as Usaid have partnered with Malawi government and a wide variety of Malawian institutions to advance a Malawi's low emissions, climate resilient development. And at national level, USAID works with government to develop a strategy for combating deforestation, for improving forest governance, and many other interventions. I think let me stop there for now, as far as the question from Diana is concerned.
All right, thank you. So there's a comment here, so the images and videos make you realize that the term affected by climate change has a lot of nuance to it. And then he goes further to say that the meaning is much heavier in Africa than in the Western world. This is from Masha Kihus. And then there's also, thank you, comments coming from attendees. So at this point, I think we will end here. We'll end this session and then move to the last session for the day. But thank you very much, guys, for your excellent work. We appreciate your time and all like that. Thank you. I'll then leave the moderation to the next person. Thank you very much. Great job.
Thank you.
Thanks to the entire team. That was a really great presentation. I'm really enjoying listening to them all. Good work. So once again, we're just going to take some time to move the current panelists into the attendee list and promote the other ones back into this list. Okay. And I'm just going to work on that. Oh, hold on a sec. There we go. Okay, I think I got everyone there. All right, moving people around. Did I miss anyone? Okay, there we go. Okay, here we are. All right, so this is the last talk of the session, and I want to welcome Alice and Eric for the talk on climate impact financing and accounting within Sub-Saharan Africa. And just let me introduce the speakers. So Alice is a doctoral student with a specialization in accounting at the University of Ghana at their business school, and she firmly believes that accounting and finance can help address the problem of climate change, which I fully agree with. And Eric Doe is a PhD candidate from the Department of Geography and Resource Development at the University of Ghana, and he has a master's degree in agricultural economics and over 10 years of field experience in sustainable agricultural development. So welcome, Alice and Eric, for the talk that we're about to hear today.
And thank you very much for the opportunity.
Looks like we just, there we go. Okay.
Thank you once again for the opportunity to share thoughts on climate impact financing and accounting evidence from some sub-Saharan African countries. And my name is Alice. This will be the outline for our introduction. As it has already been illustrated or expressed by my colleagues in their earlier presentations, we can all clearly agree that climate change poses a lot of risk, and it's no longer just an environmental risk, but also an issue of a fiscal concern. And this issue came up in Rio in 1992, as well as in Kyoto in 1997 and 2015 in Paris, where parties that were in attendance agreed that to be able to address the issue of climate change, there's a need for some financial contributions to be made to vulnerable countries which tend to be low emitters, but tend to bear the brunt of climate change. And so this brings us to the concept of climate finance. Generally, the UNFCCC defines climate finance as the local, national, or transnational financing that to help mitigation as well as adaptation actions that will address climate change. And so basically, they are the economic resources that are invested to address the issue of climate change. And specifically in the year 2009, as well as 2010, we had some developed countries commit or make some concerted efforts to mobilize some climate finance to the developing countries. And in view of that, there was a need for some financing mechanisms to be put in place. And one is what we call the Clean Development Mechanism. This mechanism is a medium to ensure that developing countries could trade their emissions, their reduced emissions to developed countries. And as well, it could also give developed countries the opportunity to invest in activities that reduce emissions in the developing context. In terms of the sources of climate finance, it could be public, it could also be private, or we could also have alternative financing arrangements. And specifically, the climate finance could be in the form of a loan, it could be in the form of a grant, it could be in the form of equity, it could also be in the form of a guarantee. So these are some of the financing vehicles. We now want to look at the financial flows. Okay, as I mentioned earlier on, there was a commitment by the developed countries to make some contributions to developing countries, and specifically they pledged 100 billion per year by 2020 for developing countries. But according to Anthem 2020, it looks like only 10% of this budget has been achieved. Again, as I mentioned, the sources of fund could be either public or private. We've also had some industries like Amazon, Nestle Euro, and Microsoft make some contribution. And specifically, Amazon and Microsoft have climate pledge fund as well as a climate innovation fund, respectively, where they invest in organizations that have innovative technologies to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. We now want to look at the pledge with regards to the 100 billion pledge, how much has been contributed by the developed countries. So this is just to give us a chart as to the countries that have made some contributions to the Green Climate Fund, which happens to be the major financing instrument or agency for developing countries. So we have USA, we have Japan, and we have UK lead the charts, whilst we have Mexico and Czech Republic not making any contribution as at November 2020. Again, we now also want to look at the trends as far as the climate flows have been contributed. And generally, we have the World Bank, which happens to be the trustee for the Global Environmental Facility. We can see the blue line is to help you know how much they've invested in mitigation, whilst the red line is to help you know how much has been invested in adaptation. The green is just the total contributions that World Bank has made in addressing the problem of climate change. So we can clearly see that over the period of 2011 to 2019, there's been a seemingly increase in the flows from the World Bank in addressing climate change, with the exception of the year 2013, as well as 2015 and 2019, where we realized a drop. But probably the explanation for 2019 is the fact that we experienced COVID globally. And again, when it comes to mitigation as well as adaptation actions, we see that World Bank tends to invest more in mitigation than that of adaptation, with the exception of the year 2013, as well as that of 2018. So on the issue of the trend, this time we want to look at the funds that have flowed from developed countries to developing countries. And most of the OECD countries tend to be a part of the contributors to the developing countries. Generally, the blue line is to give you a holistic picture as to how much has been spent to all developing countries. But I just want to talk about the Africa as well as that of the Sub-Saharan Africa. And you can clearly see from the charts that the North Sahara Africa, which is represented by the deep red, which is the last one, and the green, which represents Europe, developing countries in Europe, we realize that there's a fall in the flows to those particular contexts. But then interestingly, we have, although Africa in general tends to have dropped in 2019, we see that Sub-Saharan African region experienced a steady growth over the period of 2010 to the period of 2019. And this probably could be that, to just reiterate it, what I just spoke about in the previous charts, this is just to give us a clear picture. On the left-hand side of this slide, you can see the blue representing Africa, and you can see the red representing the Sub-Saharan African region. It's been more of a roller coaster as far as the climate financing movement has been to Africa, as well as that of the Sub-Saharan Africa. But interestingly, in 2019, where most funds were, most contexts were experiencing a fall, the Sub-Saharan African experienced an increment. And this could be probably because it is considered to be more vulnerable as far as climate change problem is concerned. Now, on my right-hand side, we have the charts focusing on Malawi. We are focusing on the climate financial flows to Malawi, Tanzania, and Ghana. So the green represents Malawi, whilst the mauve represents Tanzania and the blue representing Ghana. For Tanzania and Malawi, we realized that there was a fall in the year 2019, which all boils down to the fact of COVID-19. But interestingly, Ghana experienced some surge in 2019, which could be explained by the fact that in March 2019, the government of Ghana set up an investment forum to help it implement its nationally determined contributions here. So in economics, we say that resources are scarce. And because resources are scarce, these agencies or funding agencies cannot tend to invest in all the sectors. So World Bank Group has come up or prioritized 5 areas which they would channel most of their funds to address climate change. And we have the energy sector, we have grid, we have cities, we have transport, and then we have manufacturing. But generally, we can clearly see that the most emphasized sector is agriculture sector. And one thing about climate financing is that when we invest in climate, in addressing climate change, we tend to have multiple effects. So you can clearly see that in as much as World Bank is contributing to these sectors, they are also helping to achieve some of the sustainable development goals. So we have goals 7, 1, 2, 8, 13, 15, and even that of 11 and 9 as well. Now we want to illustrate how much or how the funding from these agencies have been used in Ghana. And especially Ghana has an all-inclusive climate financing intervention. And generally there's a payment for ecosystem services. Again, the Ghana Cocoa Board tries to encourage cocoa farmers not to cut down trees in their quest to plant their cocoa, to plant their cocoa. And so they've engaged some private certification bodies such as Organic, RA Roots, and Fair Trade Certified Cocoa to give certification to farmers that use sustainable means of farming their cocoa. And so for those who love chocolates, when you're buying chocolates and you tend to see the Fair Trade logo, Rainforest Alliance certified, the USDA organic, it means that one way or the other, you're contributing to climate finance. And again, we also have a Ghana Forest Investment Program, which is to help reduce the cutting down of trees, which would, at the end of the day, help us to reduce emissions. And some of the sources of funds for Ghana's climate smart agriculture has been from the UNFCCC and the World Bank and other agencies. Now, in the previous slide, I mentioned that farmers that have the organic certification tend to enjoy about $600 per metric ton, whilst those that have the UTS or Rainforest Alliance certification enjoy $400 per metric ton. And then the certified forest products has to do with timber, encouraging that once you cut down the trees, you should plant another in place to get that certification. Despite the importance of financing and accounting to addressing climate change, we have some challenges, saddling this particular discipline. And generally, we have the issue of the verification and compliance. There's been assertion that donor organizations tend to overflate the amount of money that they channel to recipients organizations. And so because there's lack of data and you can't tend to verify, there's a need for more auditing to be done on how much is being given by donor organizations to that of the recipient countries. Again, we currently tend to see that there's a lot of focus on financial performance, rather than that of the social and environmental performance. And in the Sub-Saharan African region, we have a lack of awareness. Most people lack knowledge on how climate change works, and as such, do not know how to take advantage of the climate financing mechanisms. And this all boils down to the fact that there's inadequate technical and institutional capacity. And again, we have issues with climate budgeting, where low budgetary allocations are made for climate impact. Generally, we want to say that in order to flatten the curve as far as climate change or climate emissions are concerned, there is a need for adequate financing and accounting in developing countries to enhance climate change mitigation and adaptation. And so there's a call for more innovative financing arrangements, such as the climate insurance and more private sector partnerships. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Alice. So there's already a couple of comments and questions in the chat box, and I'll encourage people to continue putting them in. I see Eric, who is one of the co-presenters, has entered a question. He's entered several, actually. So I think I'm going to start with one of them in the middle, which is, do you think that can climate finance really beat climate change?
Not necessarily, but at least it could met out a lot or reduce a lot of its impact. So we need to be intentional. It's not just about channeling the monies. We need to be intentional to know how the funds are being used. Because if we give them monies and we are not, we don't have better accountability structures, then probably it could be invested in something else other than the climate reduction programs. Yeah.
Okay, great, thanks. And then another comment from Eric is, what climate accounting and financing systems do we have in developing countries to educate students or communities to make use of the existing financing mechanisms?
Currently, as I mentioned earlier, we tend to have a low level of knowledge on how it works. And so I'm currently undertaking a study, and you realize that virtually most of the public universities, about 6 of them, don't seem to have any program as far as accounting for greenhouse gases are concerned. Yeah. So it's a bit of a challenge.
Yeah, great. And then from Roy Culpepper, China is now one of the biggest donors to Africa, more than Western OECD countries. Is China also helping to support climate finance in Africa?
Okay, as you mentioned, because we have some investments in here, probably yes, but with the OECD, they focus with what I presented, our focus was on funds from developed countries to developing countries. So we didn't tend to focus on other developing countries contributing to another developing country.
Okay, great. Thanks. Did you want to add something to that, Eric?
Yes, please. Definitely, China is contributing a lot in terms of climate impact mitigation in the developing country, particularly in Africa, where they have a lot of their investments. This is because most of the technology that we use, for instance, in conserving energy and producing clean energy, solar technology are coming from China. Most of those gadgets are produced and developed in China. So through that, they are also helping to mitigate climate and finance climate change impact in developing countries. They all have specific budget. All the countries that are emitting carbon in large quantities are virtually investing resources. US, China, and Japan, and the rest are all investing to mitigate climate impact in Africa. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So I don't see any additional questions in the chat box. I did have one question before we finish up. So there's a lot of money that you showed previously, Alice, for coming in from Western and OECD countries for climate financing. Is there some accountability to make sure that the money that comes in is directed to climate financing, or is there a chance that money comes in and it goes someplace else?
Okay, so thank you for the question. In some of the narratives, people, I think in Malawi as well as Tanzania, some reports from there indicated that there seems to be a mismatch between, when the monies come in and what they are being used for. And because of that, I think UNFCCC has come up with a biannual assessment where donors can have workshops and interact with their recipients as to how much they are giving and how it is being utilized. It's still evolving. The concept of climate finance is evolving. And as such, the accountability mechanisms are being put in place to ensure that moving forward, we can be more, whatever people state can be verified. I wouldn't just be one person saying one thing and the other person using it for whatever purpose other than what it was meant for.
Okay, great, thank you. Okay, so on that note, there's another comment in the chat box from Ulemu. Oh, but it's an answer to Roy, so that's fine. So I'm going to conclude the webinar for today. Stephanie, if you want to put up the last slide for me, that'd be great. Thank you, everyone. Thanks to all of the presenters, everyone on the teams. This was a real group effort from the QEAS scholars that we have here that we're doing the programming with at Carleton, Ghana, Malawi, and Tanzania. And if you enjoyed today's talk, I want to let you know about another seminar series that we're doing in October on the 27th and the 28th. And Steph, if you could just pop into the chat box the link there for it for more information. So the talk series in October is like specific research talks by various scholars, not just this group of scholars, but also we have had several cohorts of scholars that we've been hosting through Carleton. And so it includes them and also scholars from other QE programs as well. And so please come to that as well. And I hope this was helpful. We have been recording it and we'll be posting it online for anyone who wants to zoom in and hear a specific section over again. So once again, thanks so much. My name was Professor Onita Basu, and I was really happy to be able to host everyone and the scholars at the seminar session. And I'll just a quick shout out to Stephanie Pinot, who's the project coordinator, who's done a great job setting up the webinar and running technical in the background with us all as well. So thanks, and I hope everyone has a good day, morning, or evening. Thanks so much.